G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to Star Citizen with Mags, and welcome to the patch 3.5 PTU. Now the PTU, or the Public Test Universe, was made available to all backers a couple of days ago. I've been on it pretty much since it came out of Evocati, and, well, I'm honestly less than impressed with this particular PTU, and there's a couple of things that I really hope either get reverted or drastically changed before it goes onto the live servers. Otherwise, well, I don't think I'll be playing much of patch 3.5, and I honestly don't think I'll be playing much of Star Citizen in general until some changes or adjustments or tweaks are made. And I'm talking about the overheating. Not just the overheating in quantum travel, but also the overheating in standard atmospheric flight. But before we go too far into the negatives here, let's have a look at a couple of the positives of patch 3.5 on the PTU that I've seen so far, and we'll start off with ArcCorp. Now, Artcorp is a new planet that has been added to Star Citizen's PTU and will be added to the PU. It is the third planet from the Sun in the Stanton system. It's the largest rocky planet within the system, and it's one of the most interesting planets in the entirety of Star Citizen's lore, as it is one of the few planets in human space that is completely covered in cities. Arccorp is, of course, another planet much like Kingston that is owned by a corporate entity rather than being owned by the UEE directly, and over the time of its development, the entire surface of the planet has been covered in one massive megacity. It's essentially the Star Citizen version of Coruscant, and the best way to take a look at it, especially at nighttime, is actually just to take the public transit system, which is essentially a flying bus through the city, which is what we're on right now. Now, the primary landing zone for ArcCorp is Area 18, which was the ArcCorp test area in previous versions of Star Citizen, although the design and layout itself has changed drastically over time. It's a lot larger now, and there is most certainly a lot more to it, a lot more places to go, and it's a lot more interesting to look at. It's actually incredibly beautiful to look at. While Coruscant from Star Wars may be the best description for how this planet functions, in all honesty, I think it reminds me more of the megacity from The Fifth Element more than anything else, especially when you see it at daytime. Unfortunately, as seems to be the case always, when I first arrived in ArcCorp and took my first look around it, it was daytime and I thought it was incredibly beautiful. The second I logged in to actually start recording the city for this video, the sun had unfortunately set. Still, the area is no less remarkable to look at nighttime, and it sells itself as a city extremely well. Nothing looks like it's just gridded out. The way the buildings are placed looks convincing. While some of the low-level traffic animations do look very flat and very 2D, it's not horrible. I don't have a problem with any of it. I mean, just look at that. So yeah, ArcCorp, extremely well done. The entire planet and the Area 18 landing zone, it's incredibly beautiful to fly over, looks convincing as a city, that's all it needs to do, and I'm really looking forward to the other landing zones becoming available. Optimization-wise, it runs extremely well. I didn't notice any notable frame rate change between operating here in ArcCorp and operating in Lorville, so that's not bad. Now, the second area that I was interested in with this patch was, as I mentioned before, the atmospheric flight model. Now, I'll be clear and upfront, I was not expecting this to be a simulation-grade aerodynamic model. That was not what I was expecting at all. I was expecting it to be basically an arcade flight mode, with a little bit of drag and a little bit of resistance on the airframes when you're flying around inside of an atmosphere, and that was about it. That was all I was expecting, and I was expecting it to be very unfinished, because the developers themselves have said that this is just the first iteration and further changes will be made as time goes on. So again, no problem here. And this is largely what I found. I was pretty happy with the flight model that I've seen for the atmosphere as it currently stands. It's probably a little bit more stupid warning zones around the city. It's probably a little bit more arcadey than I would have expected initially. For example, when doing maneuvers in a ship, even one designed with aerodynamics in mind, such as, say, the Sabre or the Anvil Hawk, something with wings, something with control surfaces, something that is clearly designed to take atmosphere into account in its ability to fly, you would expect that when you roll the spacecraft, it would induce a subtle turn. Essentially, the spacecraft would bank. That does not happen. You have to fly the T. If you want to turn left or right, you have to roll the spacecraft, and then you need to add pitch authority in order to make the bank, or you need to use your yaw controls in order to make the turn. Rolling the spacecraft will make no difference whatsoever. It will continue to fly straight. Now, I would expect that that would happen on any spacecraft that's not designed to take aerodynamics into an account, but I would have expected things like the Sabre and the Anvil Hawk, the Gladiator, ships like that to actually bank, at least to some level, when you start a roll. Maybe that's something you'll get added later. It's not a major issue. The drag effects were again a little soft, but there was enough there that controlling the spacecraft was much easier over terrain. As you can see, I had a lot of fun dodging down canyons, dodging around rocks, finding every single little piece of debris that I could possibly find, and throwing the spacecraft around it. I was enjoying myself. For a first iteration, the flight model is perfectly fine in my opinion. Also, the female models look great, and the new character creator is extremely strange but functional, and was, at the very least, interesting to use. Now, unfortunately, I can't talk about anything else that may be interesting that's been added to patch 3.5, because this is a point where we start running into problems, and there is two major issues that we tend to run into here. And the first is this one. Now at this point I've been flying the Hawk for about 6 to 7 minutes. I have not been using afterburner, I have not been doing anything to overheat or overcharge the engines, I haven't played with any power settings. All I've been doing is nicking around the canyons and around the mountains that are outside of Lawville. And the engines have just overheated. Now, I'm going to fly for about 60 seconds, and in about 60 seconds the engines are going to reach terminal heat temperature, and they're going to shut off for about 5 seconds. In that 5 seconds, they're going to cool down, and when they cool down, the engines will automatically throttle back up to maximum. And once this sequence has started, without you doing anything to overpower, overcharge, or overclock any of your systems, this will continue to happen while flying, and there we go, the engines have just shut down. And there we go, the engines have just throttled back up on their own. That will continue to happen about once every 60 seconds for the rest of the time you are flying this spacecraft, no matter what you do. Do you guys remember the last military fighter that was released that, you know, its engines will overheat 6 minutes into a mission and required the engines to be shut off continuously once every minute in order to prevent the engines from exploding? Neither do I. Do you guys remember the last car you drove that would just randomly stall itself for no apparent reason whatsoever? Well, maybe that's a bad example. There are some real shitter cars out there that occasionally do some really awful things, but as a general rule, a maintained machine that has nothing wrong with it, that is in perfect condition, is well looked after, does not randomly turn itself off for no apparent reason, or turn itself off because it's overheating. And yet this is what happens here, and it happens with every single small single person ship that I have flown in the PTU up until this point. This is the Razor. This is essentially a Formula 1 car in spaceship form, and at this point we're only about 3 minutes into the flight and we've already had the overheating problem pop up, and the engines are going to shut off again about 60 seconds after the warning begins. This happens with every single small ship that I have flown in the 3.5 PTU, and it makes flying a chore. It makes it unenjoyable, and that is actually a really, really bad thing, because despite all the bugs that have been present in each of the builds of Star Citizen that I've ever played, despite all of the content droughts in some of the patches, despite some of the things, there we go, engines are off, and there we go, engines are back on again. Despite all of the little issues that Star Citizen has had over time, the one thing that I've never had a complaint of, regardless of which iteration of the flight model that has been present in the game at any given time, is that the ships have always been fun to fly. It has always been fun to grab a couple of mates and jump into a ship, or grab a couple of small ships, one person in each, and just to go and fly around, especially once the planets came into effect, to go and dogfight some AI, even when the dogfighting wasn't all that great. Generally because of the ESPs, or because some of the hit detection wasn't all that wonderful. it was still fun to fly the ships. This is not fun to fly. In fact, this is infuriating to fly. And while it's very predictable flying around an atmosphere to see this actually happen, it gets even worse when you get into quantum travel. If you take one of these small ships and you decide to try and do even a small jump between Kingston and Artcorp, you will have the engines overheat in quantum travel. Once again, this is not you're tinkering with the ship's systems, you're playing with the power levels, you're doing something to generate an overheat. No, just basic operation of the ship as the ship is intended to be operated will cause an overheat. And in quantum travel, it's worse because it's not predictable. Sometimes I've managed to make that trip between Kingston and Artcorp, or from Port Olisar to Artcorp, and the engines overheat into the flight, but you still manage to make the entire trip without dropping out of quantum. Other times I've taken that exact same ship and tried to perform the quantum jump, and 2 or 3 minutes into the flight, the quantum jump has failed, I've collapsed into normal space, I have to wait till the engines cool down, and once the engines have cooled down, re-spool the quantum drive, re-enter quantum, only to have it happen again 3 to 4 times during the course of the trip, taking what is already a relatively long journey in a small spacecraft, which I don't actually have a problem with. I have no problems with the travel time at all. But in worst case scenarios, it can essentially double the length of time it actually takes to complete the trip to where you want to go. Once you take into account the time that you have to wait for the engines to cool down, the re-spooling, the re-entering, the re-accelerating, and so on, over and over and over again. This is a ship mechanic. And as somebody who loves to fly and absolutely loved flying all the ships in Star Citizen, this straight up makes me not want to fly the ships. And if I don't want to fly the ships, I have absolutely no reason to play this game. Now, you can of course work around this. To work around it, however, you need to either overclock your cooling system, and in doing so drastically negatively affect its durability. The overclocking system is designed for emergencies to get extra performance out of a subsystem at a time that you may need it, but of course drastically increases the amount of wear that it takes, causing it to fail at a much earlier time than it would. And by, in addition to that, also shutting down every single other system in the spacecraft, turning off your weapons, turning off your shields, turning off anything else that could potentially generate heat inside of the spacecraft, and you'll be able to fly. The second way to avoid it is to never exceed about 60% of your maximum speed in any given situation. If you do anything else but this, you'll continually run into the overheating problem. Even something as simple as just trying to fly out of the atmosphere of a planet at about 17 to 20 degrees, you're going to overheat your engines, and they're going to fail the whole way up. In fact, my engines failed 7 times between ground level on Kingston and finally hitting space. So, this mechanic needs to change. And it's very obvious the reason why. Regardless of what excuses have been made for the way this system is operating, I don't care. I don't care how much defense people want to put up for it, and I know there are some that are actually defending this. It's rubbish. This is a game about flying spaceships. If flying spaceships is a chore and an annoyance, people will not fly spaceships. And thus the point of playing the game has been broken. Now, don't get me wrong. I can understand these kind of problems happening if the ship has taken damage. If you've been in a fight and you've taken a major ass kicking and you're trying to limp home, systems are failing, things aren't working correctly, the cooling system isn't operating as it should, and it's constantly overheating, causing engine failures, causing you to drop out of quantum, causing your engines to splutter and stall while you're flying through an atmosphere, perfectly fine. A damaged ship should fly like crap, that's the entire point. But when the ship is shiny, new, fresh out of the hangar, doesn't have a scratch on the paintwork, everything is perfectly maintained, every single system is at 100%, and you need to treat it like it's made of delicate glass in order to be able to fly it without having these kind of problems, then it's just bloody annoying. Unless the overheating system here is entirely removed or heavily modified so that you can actually fly your ship without having it turn itself off every 60 seconds, I'm unlikely to be playing patch 3.5 at all. And looking at my rather sizable Star Citizen community on my Discord and speaking to them and their opinions about 3.5, I don't think I'm going to be alone in this. So yeah, that's my opinion of the Star Citizen 3.5 PTU. The city of ArcCorp is absolutely beautiful. I've loved walking around in it and exploring it. I would love to spend more time exploring it. In fact, I probably will. The new flight model, I'm not against. I actually quite enjoy it, at least a small amount of time that I've managed to fly around and play it before I get sick and tired of my ship bunny hopping every 60 seconds. But this new overheating mechanic is a game breaker. It is absolutely absurd. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video and thank you very much for watching. As always, remember to click the like button if you did, or click the dislike button as well if you didn't. That option is always available, and let me know in the comment section down below what you think. I'd love to hear your opinions or personal experiences as well. And as always, fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.